because of that, I was talking at a party. The woman I'm talking to was intrigued by the article. She said, "Are you a lawyer?" I said, "No, I just dress like one." Anyway, I went to law school because of that article.
What did you say, Corey?
30 seconds.
20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. We have a very interesting guest today. His name is Steve Cohn. No, he's not the owner of the Mets. No, he's not the magician. But he's going to talk about the Fair Claims Act and how just about every one of you is affected by that fraud under that act. Welcome to our show, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
So, you want me to talk about the False Claims Act? I'd be thrilled to, because I never knew about it until fairly recently. They don't teach you about it in law school.
Interesting. And yet every consumer who files a claim for their medical insurance is affected when their claim is rejected.
It can be. It can be indeed. The False Claims Act started, it was actually President Lincoln's idea. 1863, he went to Congress and said, people are cheating us. Manufacturers, vendors are taking advantage of the federal government. And the two most famous examples that he cited to Congress were first that the government, the Army, had ordered 400,000 pair of leather boots. And the 400,000 pair of leather boots were delivered and paid for. Soldiers put them on, and the first time they marched across a muddy field, the boots disintegrated. So they weren't made of leather, they were made of cardboard.
Oh my God.
The second one was more serious. 5 million rounds of ammunition were ordered by the Army, delivered. Soldiers went out in the field, put the bullets into their rifles. Nothing happened because they weren't filled with gunpowder, they were filled with sawdust. And President Lincoln said, people are going to cheat us. We have to get ahead of this. And he created something called the False Claims Act. And he said, we want to give whistleblowers, insiders, and that was probably the first time the term whistleblower was actually used in the government. We want to give them both protection and an incentive to blow the whistle. The protection were no retaliation provisions built into the law. And the incentive was the government gets any money that is collected, but the whistleblower gets about 20%. And the penalties against the wrongdoers trebled the damages. So there was a lot of money at stake. But there was a key. The money had to have been defrauded of the government, not of private individuals. And it's been extended to state governments and local governments as well. And every year, the federal government today collects about $6 or $7 billion a year because of whistleblower tips and assistance. And the whistleblowers are getting about 20% of that, about $1.5 billion.
Aside from the financial incentive, what a kind of person usually does this?
That's a great question. It's not the money that motivates them. It's the sense of wrongdoing. As you said, we see it all the time. As regular, everyday citizens, we see people who are cheating the government, and it affects us. You go to a doctor, you see additional billings. You go to a nursing home, you see services not provided.
Oh, I get bills from Mount Sinai. I go in there and I get a tiny little bit of attention, and they claim perhaps hundreds of dollars for this few minutes that they spend with me.
Now, it's not a crime, or it's not a crime under the False Claims Act if they bill a private insurance company. It is a crime when they bill Medicare or Medicaid. So that's what triggers the actual the False Claims Act laws, whether the state law, which is almost identical to the federal law. But in fact, one state, California, has imposed a private version of the False Claims Act when wrongdoers cheat private insurance companies or private parties, the same whistleblower incentives kick in place.
There's nothing in New York State, I presume.
Oh, there is.
Go on,
Oh,
please.
we
Talk about,
haven't,
please.
but not for private.
Too bad.
Only for state. When they defraud the state. We had a case recently of a medical college having medical students who were not authorized to sign charts or conduct certain procedures, and yet they were. And the medical college was approving this unauthorized billing of the both state government because it was Medicaid and the federal government because it was Medicare. But I want to go back to the question you said. Whistleblowers typically are older because they've been around. They know how things work. They know when things are not working properly. And the one underlying common denominator is outrage. The money that's the incentive helps get over some fears. And there are fears because although the law includes no retaliation provisions, companies, organizations, people are stupid. The bad guys are stupid very often, and they retaliate when someone blows the whistle. When they come to, when someone goes to their boss and says, you really shouldn't be doing this. Instead of cleaning up their act, too many companies double down, continue, and then fire the person who's blowing the whistle. Because, it's just outrageous. And there are more incentives and protections. The person who blows the whistle may have been fired. They get potentially get even more money because of the retaliation against them by the companies.
But they probably have to, there's probably certain standards that they must produce to show that it was retaliation.
You're absolutely right. So the retaliation typically is getting fired. And
But the thing is, the trick is, were they fired because of the retaliation or because of something else? And the boss will say, well, you slacked off, you came late, or who knows what.
And then you say, sure, show us the records. Now, trust me, people manufacture records.
Absolutely.
I'm in the middle of a case right now where the forgeries are not only so obvious, they've been admitted to. They say, oh, we didn't really mean to do it. It was just a glitch in the system. But the forgeries are obvious. And when you try to cover, remember, with the 50th anniversary of Watergate, the cover-up was worse than the crime. And it's true in the whistleblower world as well, often, that the cover-up, the retaliation is just silly and foolish.
Would
and it
you
makes it
give
worse.
us an example of a case?
Sure, happy to. So we represent and have been representing a woman who's, let's say, 50 years old, very professional, and she was the quality control person for a major medical manufacturing company. Vice president, she'd been there for a while, advanced degrees. She comes into her new supervisory role, and she's looking at all the devices that this company, a well-known, well-established company, is marketing to hospitals and doctors. And they all have to be FDA approved. And because she's quality assurance, she's going through the records, and she realizes that 70% of the products they're selling have never been approved by the FDA. There were 30% that were, and then the company changed the product a little bit, didn't go through the paper. Modified it just a little bit. And she goes to the president. And she says to the president, hey, let's do the right thing. Let's get the FDA approval. It'll cost some money. It'll take a little time. But it's safety. It's a safety issue. He said, don't worry about it, he said to her. She goes, we can't market these things. It's against the law. Don't worry about it. I am worrying about it. What does he do? Fires her. Sensing that this might happen, what did she do? She started collecting her records and approached an attorney, actually a colleague of mine. We did the case with him. And
Question, did she approach you before she went to him?
No. She did not. She approached him. She was doing the right. She's a good corporate person.
Yes.
She wants the company, which manufactures some very important, very good products, to do the right thing. And she was outraged that they weren't doing the right thing. And despite her, so she wasn't yet an outside whistleblower, she was an inside whistleblower. She followed the procedures within the company, saying to her boss, who was the president.
And she followed the procedures in her company. She did this, she did her job.
Exactly.
She discovered this as part of her duty.
Right. And they retaliated, which was foolish, because that exacerbated. So then she comes to the lawyer. And how she found us, I'm not sure. Usually people Google whistleblower lawyer, New York City, and we come up somewhere on the list. And she called and told us a story. In turn, we say, okay, what documents do you have that show this? And as I said, sensing that she was going to get in trouble, she downloaded all of her legitimate information and brought it to us. We, in turn, the next step, what makes this law that President Lincoln created so interesting is that the plaintiff is actually the government, because who was defrauded? The government was defrauded by using Medicare money to pay hospitals, to reimburse hospitals to pay for these devices. And so the fraud was financially against the government. And what the law calls for is for the attorney with the client to go to the U.S. Attorney's office in that area. And it can be, you can shop a little bit if it's a national company, and there is such a thing as, jurisdictional shopping. And we say to the assistant U.S. attorney, here's what this person, who is known as a relator, the plaintiff is a relator, the whistleblower, they're all synonymous.
Related the story.
And the case is brought on behalf of the government, but with essentially a private prosecutor. And the government takes it over, or it doesn't have to take it over, but the government takes over the case and pursues the bad guy. And what's fascinating about this, and this is, again, where the protections come in, the case, when it's filed, a complaint actually filed in the court, is filed under seal. The plaintiff, the relator, is not identified. Their anonymity is maintained. And the government then starts investigating, and they knock on the door of the defendant company and say, may we see the records of the FDA approvals for those 70 devices? Now, typically, companies have a sense of who probably blew the whistle,
Sure.
if they've already fired the person, as they did in this case. And very often they go on a witch hunt if they don't know who the whistleblower is. Again, with the intent, foolishly, to intimidate. And most cases, 90% of the cases, get settled once the government intervenes, joins the case.
But what if the government said the person, the district attorney or whatever, the person you go to, looks at it, and for whatever reason, doesn't proceed?
And and that happens plenty often. Here's why, and they don't do it. Sometimes it's two small potatoes. It's $1 million in fraud, and we're only interested, the government will say, in $10 million minimum frauds. You, the private attorney, our firm, you have the right to pursue the case on our behalf. We still get the money, but we're going to give you an additional incentive. Instead of the 20% that your client will receive if it's successful, gets 30%. So for doing the extra work, both the relator and the attorney gets a little bit more financial incentive. And we do it all the time. Sometimes the government says, this is a great case, it's just too small, we don't have the time, we don't have the expertise, pursue it on your own.
Well, you have to go to the government attorney?
Yes, it is required by the law. Mm-hmm. So most cases are federal, so you go to the U.S. attorney. Some cases are state, and you go to the state attorney general. And New York has an identical law as the federal law, with one really interesting addition. In the federal law, there's no tax fraud. The IRS has its own whistleblower statute that gives rewards. It's not very efficient, but it works. New York State, when it wrote its law about 15 years ago, also built in tax fraud. And so, in fact, we have a case where a well-known developer was playing some games, and ownership of the property was changing hands. Didn't pay the property tax, the transfer tax, and it was millions of dollars. That is an example of a New York exclusive case. But there are many. It's truly sad, Sandra. I mean, there's so many examples of fraud, in part because the federal government budget is so large. If you have and the health budget alone in the United States by the federal government is about $1 trillion. $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. And it doesn't take a lot of fraud to get large numbers. It doesn't take a lot of bad actors to run up really big incentives and fraud numbers.
Hospital fraud.
Medical fraud, whether by doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, middlemen. We have a case right now involving nursing homes, where a provider to nursing homes is just inflating the number of procedures that they say they are doing.
Sounds familiar. I remember seeing that on my own bill. Of course, my bill does go to, shall we say, Medicare?
Yeah, Medicare.
Yeah.
As does mine. Medicare pays 80% of all medical bills.
Yeah.
And private insurance or individual pay the other 20%. And in this case, both the medical provider and the nursing home knows that they're not getting all of these procedures, but they're not paying for this medical provider to provide the care. The federal government is. So they turn their head. They're complicit. And the patients are not getting the care they deserve and need. It's horrific. I mean, the newest area of False Claims Act cases are PPP loans. Remember 2 years ago when COVID hit and the government came up with, we're going to keep, the Paycheck Protection Act. We're going to keep businesses in business.
Right.
And you could apply for, depending on the size of your staff, money to keep you employed for 3 to 4 months, typically is what they paid. And thousands of small businesses were kept in business by that money. And I don't remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars flowed through that program in less than 6 months. Not surprisingly, there were bad guys who took advantage, who took the money, first inflated the number of employees they supposedly had, got the money, closed the business, used it on personal homes, cars, yachts, and took advantage. Absolute fraud. And people are coming forward to us again because of outrage and saying, I know this isn't right. My friends didn't get hired. They got fired. They were supposed to be employed with this money. And they didn't get, they were let go. And so we are getting lots of people coming to us who know and are outraged. And the financial incentive of the reward doesn't hurt, but it's never the motivator. It's never the prime motivator. So healthcare is the biggest.
Well, the thing is, the money is actually coming out of their pocket.
Yeah.
It's called taxpayer
Exactly right.
money.
Exactly right. Defense industry has its own fair share, and it did particularly during Iraq and Afghanistan, because lots of contractors were supporting the military over there, inflating bills, not providing services, and whistleblowers have come forth. Plenty do, but it's scary to be a whistleblower. It's never easy.
Yes.
It's never easy, but people have the backbone to say, all right, I want to see what's right. And the financial reward doesn't hurt to make that backbone a little stronger at times when they worry.
Especially if they lose their job.
Yeah.
And need to apply for another job, say when you're over 35 or 36. It isn't so easy to get a job over that age.
Yep. The woman I talked about at the beginning, who was the vice president for quality control,
Yes.
she got blackballed in her industry. And so and she could get another job because her former employer, she would say, I work for XYZ Corporation, and ABC Corporation would call up the president and say, what do you think about Joan here? And whether it was said explicitly or just by what wasn't said, she didn't get another job. So the retaliation part of her settlement took that into account, the fact that she couldn't get another, she had to change her life. She's still in science, but she could not do what she had done for years and was very, very good at and loved doing.
Yes.
It's not fair, so the law tries to take care of that in some ways. Now, there's another type of whistleblower, and we've seen it recently, of people who blow the whistle on wrongdoing that doesn't involve money. The best example, the thing that I first knew was Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg was the classic whistleblower, and of course, Daniel Ellsberg didn't have the same protections at that time as the federal government employees have today. Because the federal government infects virtually every agency and contractor for the federal government, says that if you know something that's not right, and particularly if it's not safe, let us know, and you're protected. And each agency, it usually involves having to go to the inspector general of that particular agency. We don't do that type of work. That's a very Washington-oriented type of practice. But there are very specific procedures in place that a whistleblower has to follow in order to ensure that protection. And it's fairly generous, and yet people retaliate anyway. We saw, when Colonel Vindman, who was on the national security staff, said, I think what's going on with, the president's call in Ukraine a couple of years ago, he was retaliated against. He was, not officially, but he was moved out of the National Security Agency. He was back in the Army, but, he followed the rules, and he was retaliated against despite following the rules. Life's not fair. His life was obviously dramatically affected by what he thought was the right thing to do, and what I think was the right thing to do, bring it to the public's attention. And he wasn't really protected.
Yeah. Medical, how about nursing homes?
Well, sadly, nursing homes are dangerous places for people who are there. They're typically understaffed. And the incidence of fraud, it goes in waves. There have always been there's been lots of attention of abuses by nursing homes. I was approached about a month ago by a group of surviving children and spouses of people who died from COVID in nursing homes. Now, New York State passed a law that gave them immunity.
That's right.
And so I had to explain that there was nothing we could do legally because of immunity. But lots of people died in nursing homes of COVID who probably shouldn't have.
That's right. They had more than one comorbidity, and they were housed together, and nurses moved from one, or aides, shall we say?
Yeah.
Moved from one room to the other with insufficient whatever.
Exactly. And as I said, we have this major False Claims Act case now where a whistleblower came to us and said, this particular whistleblower is a doctor who works for this medical provider company that deals with nursing homes. And he said, I know that some colleagues of mine, particularly one other doctor, and our parent company, and the nursing homes are in collusion, are colluding to deprive patients of the actual care and then bill the government for care that was not delivered. And this guy, this doctor, well, I'm going to say he's about 60 years old and had a successful career, and he thought this was going to be the last portion of his career that was going to be easier. You know, he didn't want to work the hours he was working. Was just outraged, which is why he brought it to us.
All right, so New York State, you can't sue nursing homes, but because...
For that, you can't sue them for COVID,
Okay.
but you can sue for other things.
But the thing is, their bills are a lot of their bills are paid for by the federal government.
Yes. So we have to show the systemic fraud. We have to show that there was a pattern, that they were aware of it, and that they falsely billed for services that were not really rendered. So there are other ways to get it, but
how do you prove that the services were not delivered? That's the problem.
So in this case, we have doctors and others on the staff who've taken records and who give us affidavits, say, here's what I approve. I said this level of service was delivered. The middleman in the nursing home billed for this level. It's not my, I didn't sign that. Here are my notes. Mm-hmm. This is what I agreed. This is what was billed. And people are worried about this, but the doctors and the assistants download their own notes. And you can, that's protected. You're allowed to do that in the course of an investigation like this. And people worry, can I keep these records? Even though they're HIPAA protected. And the answer is yes. They can keep those records to show that there is fraud going on. But it takes some guts to do that.
It takes a lot of guts to do that.
It really does. But they decide, again, the outrage. We, as part of this case we're developing, one of the assistants, not a doctor, but a doctor's assistant, recorded conversations on her iPhone.
Uh-huh.
And we turned that over, And the bad guy, the guy who's inflating all the bills, saying, okay, I want you to code everything like this, and I want you to say that there was this much, and it's on tape. It's absolutely astounding.
But the thing is, in New York, even though that other person doesn't know that he's being taped, it's okay.
It's okay. It's a single party state, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, other states, that's not the case. You have to give the consent. But here in New York, absolutely okay. And, God bless this particular very young one, recent college graduate working as a doctor's assistant, knew this wasn't right. And the third or fourth or fifth time that the doctor did it, she recorded it. It's a gutsy thing to do. And then partnered with the doctor who came to us, because they were both outraged by what had happened.
Yes, but she had to know going in that she was going to have a discussion about coding.
Yeah. But it was the typical routine that, and the third or fourth or fifth time it happened, she knew what this conversation was going to be about, and she recorded it.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Yes.
Very gutsy. Well, and again, most whistleblowers are not young. Most are older.
Now, by the way, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how would they do it? Please let us know 3 times.
Sure. So the firm name is Pollock Cohen, POLLOCKCOHEN.com. We're here in New York. I'm Steve Cohen, not the Mets owner, not the magician. And you can Google me, attorney, Steve Cohen, attorney, and Oz or Pollock Cohen will come up pretty quickly at the top. And just call me or email me.
What should the public take away with them?
If you see something, do something. If you're outraged by it, there's a remedy. You have way more power and protection than you probably realize. If you think it's wrong, it's probably wrong. Call an attorney. Call your own attorney who will know to call us, because other attorneys know that this is a very specialized area of the law. We get probably 50% of our referrals from other attorneys who say, I know this is a very specialized area. To take advantage of the law to its fullest, lawyers call us and say, talk to my friend, talk to my client.
I want to thank you so much for coming on this show. This was so enlightening, such terrific information.
Well, thank you for having me.
Until the next time, this is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.
Was that okay?
It was fine.
Thank you.
My voice was not okay, but the information was great.